thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming to listen to this talk. It's entitled Beyond Brexit, Global Britain and the ECJ. Just to give you a bit of background, I started off my career in a large investment bank in London. At that time, I was a committed Europhile. I worked for a bank with offices all over the world. At that time, economically, we all thought joining the euro and all of that sort of stuff was a good idea. Times, of course, has shown us that that was a disastrous idea, and thank goodness we didn't go into it. I then swapped and became a barrister. I made the big mistake of deciding to actually embark upon reading the Maastricht Treaty. You don't need to go beyond the preamble of the Maastricht Treaty to know that we were completely missold in the early 90s about what Maastricht was. Maastricht was the beginning of the political project and the start of the United States of Europe. That's what it was then, that's what it is today, and that's what it is going to be in the future, and that is no place for a global maritime nation like the UK to be. So I've gone all the way from Europhile through Eurosceptic to now Euro out. I'm not going to talk too much today about the ECJ because that is another part of the problem and one of the things that we want to get away from. There are very, very strong constitutional and democratic arguments for why we should get out of Europe. The fact that we cannot vote in and vote out any of the people in Europe who are making the laws is number one. In our country, we have a fundamental principle that the people in Parliament, the finance ministers, the people who are making our laws are answerable to us. The most potent symbol of our democracy in this country is not the House of Commons, not the dispatch box, not even the state opening of Parliament that's happening next week. It is the removal van. It is the removal van that turns up outside number 10 when we get rid of a government that's failed and we put in a new government. That is not possible with the European Union. The European Union has a budget to spend of hundreds of billions of pounds. Does anybody know who is the European Finance Minister who has responsibility for that huge, huge budget? Every time I've asked this question, and I've been to a number of these sorts of meetings, not a single person yet knows the name. He's called Valdis Dombrovskis, and I'm sure he's a very lovely man. But the point is, none of us elected him, and none of us can remove him. And that is not democracy. But I want to move on to the economics, because I start from the premise that we simply cannot stay where we are in a regional bloc any longer. Our economy is on the up. We all know that we're the 5th largest economy in the world, behind the US, China, Japan and Germany. But our economy is growing. We are the fastest growing economy in the G7. In the next few years, we are predicted to leapfrog Germany and Japan and become the 3rd largest economy in the world. And what's more, we trade globally. More of our trade now is with the rest of the world than it is with the European Customs Union. The last trade figures a couple of months ago showed that the monthly deficit alone was £23 billion. Now what that tells you is that we have to be where the growing economies are, because we are a growing economy. Now, we currently can't make any trade deals with the rest of the world because we are shackled into this European trading bloc. Now that would be a good place to be if Europe was growing. But Europe is not growing. Over the last 20 years, Europe has underperformed. Pretty much, actually every one of the largest 20 countries in the world has outperformed Europe, the European Union, over the last 20 years. So the point is that we are sticking in a place that isn't growing. We are sticking on an escalator that is going downwards, rather than having the freedom to continue on an escalator that is going upwards. And that is not the right place for the United Kingdom to be. And all the while we stay there, we cannot make our own laws, we cannot get rid of the people who are now making 62% of the laws in this country, and the decisions on all of those laws are now policed by the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, not by our own Supreme Court in London. People say, well, why can't we have EU plus? And as I've explained, we can't have EU plus because they won't let us do any trade deals with other countries. Why? People say, well, why can't we do these deals as part of the European Union? Why can't we take the lead? The reason we can't do that is because the European Union is totally incompetent when it comes to doing trade deals. India, China, the US, Canada, we've been in this situation, in this bloc, for 43 years. Have they done a single deal with India, China, Canada, the US? No, not one. Because it's a bloc of 28 countries trying to do these trade deals, and it just doesn't work. So there's no point staying there any longer. So I say to you, this is an absolutely once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to set ourselves free and to be able to trade all over the world again on favourable terms. For the sake of future generations, we have to grasp this opportunity. But there's a lot of uncertainty, and whenever there's a divorce happening, you can be sure there'll be a lawyer not far behind, which is why I've come today to explain that from a legal perspective, this is terribly straightforward. You know, this isn't going to be something that drags on for years and years. It's going to be an absolute disaster and heaps of uncertainty. If you go on the Government Business and Innovation and Skills website, there's a paper that was compiled last November, and it gives the latest business statistics. And it says exactly what this gentleman has just said, that 99% of companies in this country are small or medium-sized enterprises. So they employ less than 250 people. 95%, and I find this more interesting even, 95% employ less than 10 people. Well, when I last looked, it was 95. If it's gone up to 98, that doesn't surprise me. But the basic point is, it's only 1% of companies in this country are over 250 employees, and it's that 1% that do the majority of trade with Europe. The other 99% have to comply with every single rule and regulation that comes out of Brussels that relates to business, even though they don't trade a bean with the European Union. And that is one of the fundamental problems with it for businesses. We've all heard about these silly Brussels rules. You know, we've heard about the directive about bananas, that if bananas have more than a certain curvature, they can't be sold. We've heard about the crazy directives. If you're selling salmon in this country, it has to have a label on it that says this product may contain fish. And that is European Union law. There's another regulation that says that olive oil must not be sold in containers more than 5 litres. There's another directive that says you must not kill and eat your own pet horse. I mean, we are paying for this sort of stuff. But even if we say, look, you know, that's absolutely crazy, it's bonkers, but, you know, we've got plenty of politicians just down the road in Whitehall, they're capable of coming up with some rubbish as well. That's absolutely right, that's absolutely right. But it is the combined cost of all of these different regulations, and particularly the ones relating to working time and agency workers. It's the combined cost of them on little business that is the problem. Open Europe, an independent think tank, tried to assess the burden compared with the benefit of all these different regulations on small business in this country, and they said it is costing the country £33 billion every single year due to the sheer number, size and weight of this sort of regulation. Now, if we vote to come out, not only will we suddenly become their biggest customer, which I think will give us tremendous leverage on the trade deal, we will be able to repeal the European Communities Act and prevent any of those regulations applying to small and medium-sized enterprises. There's a slogan, think small first, which we cannot put into effect in this country as long as we remain part of the Bosses Club in Brussels. How are we doing, Richard? Any luck with the slides? Okay, well, I'll either take questions.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution so far. I suspect this young lady earlier is of the same thinking, perhaps. The Vote Leave supporters have as their primary objective to claw back some of the power, sovereignty that they lost to Europe. And I think we all agree, we don't like European sovereignty. No one's in a position to do that. Your problem is there's no economic content or substance to what you're saying, in the sense that you don't know what's going to happen next. None of us do. There's too many unknowables. The risk factor of leaving Europe, much as I'd like to be personally, is too high. We're in the middle of a recession. Britain is bankrupt, still is bankrupt. Whatever you believe, read the newspapers. I'm an economist, I do this. We are bankrupt and will be for the next 20 years. It's going to take us 20 years to repay what we owe. We're half socialist. The banking system had to be renationalised because of the failure of the system. And we're on the verge of another one. It's not the right time.
I obviously take the opposite view to that, because for every £2 that we give to the European Union, we only get £1 back. So when you gross that up, the annual tribute now going over to Europe is not far short of £20 billion every single year. It's only 10 billion that comes back. So in terms of starting to close the annual overdraft, if you like, that we're running every single year as a country, which is still around £70 billion, £10 billion is not a bad contribution. If you actually add up the amount that we have saved due to our austerity measures in the last Parliament, we've actually saved £36 billion. But in that same period of 5 years, we've sent £50 billion net to Brussels. So I come at it from the other end of the telescope. I say that this is absolutely not the time when we can afford to be paying to be a member of such an expensive club. You know, if you look at it from the other way, if we were outside the club now, you see, we've got to remember we went into the club in the 70s when we were the sick man of Europe. You know, our economy was on its knees, and Europe appeared to be, you know, a shining light of opportunity. And it was doing better then, as I've explained, 37% then of world GDP. Seemed like a good idea. But now let's just imagine that here we are now, Britain, with the 5th largest economy, the economy that's growing more than anywhere in the G7, the economy that's set to become the 3rd largest economy in the next few years. Would we today now knowing that we're trading more with the rest of the world than Europe, would we agree to a deal whereby we pay 20 billion, you give us back 10 billion, but you say to us, I'm going to have to regulate every single one of your businesses, whoever they trade with, they've got to do what I say. I want to have control of your borders such that I decide, not you, who comes in from my block of countries. And what's more, by the way, you've got quite a good army there. If you don't mind, I'll have that as well as part of the deal. Who in their right minds would agree to that if we were outside it? I've yet to find someone who says they would agree to that. Can I give you the mic so you can come back?
Yeah, just briefly, your argument is about sovereignty. And you still haven't convinced me that you've moved on from sovereignty to an economic justification.
Sorry, also, what I find really confusing is a lot of the time, what we lead in state is more a political one. And actually, we do lead with more financial, economical, social, but it's a combination of many things. We seem to just get one angle about it. But actually, for me to go to Europe without having access, that's a fantastic thing to see, especially now where I'm Asian and I'm going to be excluded because people like Donald Trump are saying you can't go into the country anymore. So stuff like that, where being part of Europe will make it easier for me to free travel.
Can I deal with your question straight up? Actually, because we're part of Europe, you would be less likely to be able to come to this country, because the result of Europe is that we cannot put up any barriers against anybody coming into Europe. And we, as a government, we have pledged to try and get some control of the numbers coming in to the UK. So if you've got one big block of 28 countries, which we know is going to be expanded to be 33 countries, you can't control the numbers coming from that block. You've got less ability to take people from other parts of the world where we have historic, very strong ties. If you're an engineering company at the moment, or an accountancy company, you can't take an engineer or an accountant from India, where there are plenty of very good accountants and engineers. You can't recruit nurses and doctors from Australia, because we have this open door to the 28 countries of Europe, and that's just another one of the rules of the club, which I don't accept. I think we should have a fair immigration policy and be open to the entire world. Not just the 28, but you've got to have some control. Now the other point, I'm not sure I'm going to persuade you, but let me just try one more time. You're absolutely right. Nobody can crystal ball gaze into the future. Some Treasury says, oh, it's all doom and gloom, but we know for a fact they can't crystal ball gaze. They can't even get their forecast right for the last 6 months. And yet now they expect us to believe that they can get it right for 60 quarters into the future. So we can put them to one side straight away. And if any of you are real insomniacs, you can have a look at that Treasury report, and you will find that, I'm not an accountant, but even I can see from reading that Treasury report that they are not comparing like with like. When they're getting to their figures and saying how much worse off we are, they are dividing future GDP growth by current population numbers. Big number on the top, small number on the bottom. What they of course should be doing is using the population as it will be in 2030. There's no one suggesting our population is going to be the same. That's just not common sense. So you can put that to one side straight away. And then if you look across the piece at all the other reports that have been done, it's actually a lot more even-handed. Some reports say we might even be better off in 2030 if we come out of Europe. Some say we might be a little bit worse off, but none of them are saying that our economy is going to grind to a halt. That's the interesting thing. They're all saying our economy is going to grow. It's a question of how much it grows. But my central thesis, as I've said, is what we do know, because it's a matter of historical record, is how economies have performed in the past. And we do know for a fact that all the time that we have been, I don't know for going back 43 years, but I do know going back 20 years, all of that time, our economy, Germany's economy, or Canada's economy, or America's economy, they've all outperformed the European Union. Now, if it was such a good place to be, I would expect it to be the other way round. Now, I would expect at least them to be performing as strongly as us. In fact, we are performing stronger than them. Yet, we have all the restrictions that we've already talked about. So, to my mind, just common sense and sheer logic says, let's not kid ourselves. We don't sit on any great natural resources in this country. We've always had to make our way in the world by what we make and sell and the services and goods that we've provided all around the world. What that says to me is you've got to be where the customers are. You've got to be where the growing economies are. And the reality is they ain't in Europe. And that's just a matter of historical fact going over the last 20 years. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, I've got 3 children. Where do I think their opportunities are going to be if they want to start a business, if they want to go abroad? I don't see those opportunities being in the Eurozone. The Eurozone has been a disaster. It's still a disaster. It's going to continue to be a disaster unless those 19 Eurozone countries really integrate and come closer together politically. And that is actually what they have set out as their plan. It's called the 5 Presidents' Report. And good luck to them. I don't want to rain on their parade. That's the direction they want to go in. I think it's the direction that they've got to go in. But that is not the right place for the UK to be. We deliberately stood outside of that single currency, and thank goodness we did, because otherwise we would be in the same position as Greece, because our budget deficit was on a par with theirs. Because we kept our independence, because we kept the pound, we are in a much stronger position. So it's not just sovereignty. I would not be standing here today unless I was absolutely sure that the opportunities for my 3 kids are outside Europe, not inside Europe. Yeah, I'd love to flick you through some of these slides actually, because the way we get out of the European Union, everyone's saying, oh well, it's Article 50. We've only got these 2 years, and then the guillotine comes down. Now that is true, but the whole way it's been set up, you do not pull that Article 50 trigger until you've got your framework of withdrawal already established. And that's made very clear in subsection 2 of Article 50, where it says that the Union, that's the European Union, shall negotiate and conclude an agreement with that state, that would be the UK, setting out the arrangements for its withdrawal, taking account of the framework for its future relationship with the Union. So you don't pull that lever until you've got at least an outline plan that's agreed as to how, as to what your ongoing trading relationship is going to be. Now the other thing that people worry about is, but those are going to probably be totally un-PC now, but those Frenches and those Continentals, they're going to try and do us down. They might. They might, but they can't ultimately, because we get to exit and get our agreement agreed by a qualified majority, not unanimous decision of the other 27. It's only a majority. It's only 55% of the other member states. So that also goes out of the window. And then this is just all a bit of legalese really. We don't really need to worry about that. It just says that at the end of 2 years, then we do exit. Okay, and then that's really saying pretty much the same thing. There's nothing we have to do. We don't have to change any laws in our country in order to go through this procedure. But we do need to get our agreement sorted before we pull that trigger, as I've already said. Okay. But this, I'm a lawyer, okay, so I sort of find all this stuff really, really fascinating. We've got a huge body of law in this country, a huge body of European law. 62% now of rules and regs do emanate from Europe. What are we going to do about them? And we've got that European Communities Act, which is the way legally we went into the whole thing in the first place. So all we have to do is we amend that act, very, very simple thing to do. Then we use statutory instruments to transpose all of the European law that we already have into our UK law. But here's the important bit. What we do is we make an amendment so that we make our own UK national policy supreme over any EU policy. And we make sure that our own UK Supreme Court becomes supreme, not the ECJ. Because every single time that we try and do something independently in this country and it goes to the ECJ, they stick up for harmonisation, for regularising, for making things the same. So that is not where we want to be any longer. And then in terms of our payments, the bad news is we do have to keep paying until we actually finally exit. And once we do finally exit, if there are any ongoing payments, of course, then they would have to be special arrangements. So, but I know this is a bit of a baffling diagram, but I put this diagram up there because what this shows you is there are any number of different arrangements currently going on in Europe and around the world. This is where we started off life in the European Free Trade Association. And this, frankly, is where I think we should go back to being. And I'll tell you why. That little group of countries there has access to 37 other countries in trade agreements. That big group there, European Union, only has access to 32 countries by trade agreements, and they're all piddling little countries as well. So if we go back to being in here, although it might seem ironic, we will have much greater reach in the world. And of course, we're not starting from scratch like Canada. It took Canada 7 years. They've almost got there now to make an agreement with the EU. Why did it take them 7 years? Because what takes all the time is getting rid of the tariffs, negotiating away all the different tariffs and all the non-tariff barriers. We are already EU compliant. We're oven ready because we're at the moment right in there. So, and I've talked to other people from the European movement, and people who are really already involved in the whole European project. They have had to concede. That makes a significant difference. So we are already compliant. So this isn't a great big dislocation, if you like. This is simply that the train is going to go off in one direction and we are going to start going off in another. But we're not going to go off in the opposite direction straight away. It's going to be a natural divergence over time. Then, of course, the other thing people say is, oh, but you're going to lose all your influence, it's going to be a disaster, no one's going to take any notice of you. And actually, that nothing could be further from the truth, because any number of the international agreements that we already have that are already enshrined in international treaties will carry on. First category, UN membership, totally unaffected by us coming out of the EU. You could add to that NATO, the Security Council, the G7, the G8, the G20, every single one of those big, major international bodies, we stay on. The mixed competence agreements, that's things like the World Trade Organization, where currently we are represented on the World Trade Organization by the European Union. If we come out of the European Union, we get to have our own seat back So instead of being 1/28th of a bottom, we get a whole bottom. I think that's a bit better. And then you've got, and then now this is what this is talking about is the free trade agreements. All those free trade, this is the grandfathering subclause. All the free trade agreements that we currently benefit as a result of being in the European Union are automatically grandfathered, so we carry on being able to benefit from them unless an individual country were to throw up their hands in horror and say no. But they won't, for the reasons I've already explained. It's more in their interest to trade with us than us to trade with them. And CFSP, that's Commonwealth, I've forgotten what the F is now, Commonwealth Foreign and Security Agreements, which I won't go into all the detail of those, but they'll just carry on as they are at the moment. So we've got nothing to worry about in terms of loss of influence and everything to gain. We come on to, now this is the trade agreements. This is what I've already been explaining, that we go back into being in that little circle and having access to the 37 countries under the 26 free trade agreements that those 4 countries already have. The big difference, the reason why I think we'd be better off in that circle, is that you then have control of your own immigration policy. You have control of your own borders. If you're in the European Economic Area, same as being in the European Union, you have no control over your immigration policy. You have to accept freedom of movement. Now, I'm not saying that we wouldn't necessarily want to agree some freedom of movement in certain areas, particularly for skilled workers in areas where we need them. The point is we would have control of that, our own government in Westminster. So that's just the EFTA free trade map, and all of this light blue area is EFTA free trade, is subject to EFTA free trade agreements, and we would have access to it, as well as all of that royal blue area, as well as all of that dark blue area. So it's really not a bad place to be. That's all a bit boring and legalistic. I'm going to just pop over that one if I may. And now this is just coming really back really onto the nitty-gritty of why do I say no to the European Economic Area membership? Why do I say that's undesirable? Because that's the worst of all worlds. That's not in Europe, but ruled by Europe. Because if you're in that little area, and Norway's in there, you become a rule taker, not a rule maker. And we wouldn't, and that is not where we want the UK to be. If we're in the EFTA group, as I've been explaining, we get the choice as to which rules we take and which rules we don't. And we make our own rules for our own domestic businesses and our own domestic companies in this country. There we are, that's the trade deficit. 61 billion trade deficit, that's goods and services. If you actually go onto the ONS website, it's actually higher than that in goods. 77 billion trade deficit we now have with the European Union in goods. So it's massively in their interests. We go back to the basic model that we had pre the common market, that's what we wanted, and we can go back to that. And we have a looser relationship than the Swiss, and a looser than the Norwegian model, because we don't want to have to accept freedom of movement. And that basically, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the presentation. It's as simple as that. Thank you very much for listening.